June 5, 1944, Upottery Airfield, England. The hours before the Normandy invasion stretched endlessly for the men of Easy Company. Inside the dimly lit hangar, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. Equipment rattled softly as men checked and rechecked their gear, while quiet conversations drifted through the room. Some attempted nervous jokes to ease the tension, while others sat in silence, lost in their own thoughts. Although packed closely together, each man faced the coming battle alone. Private Albert Blythe sat quietly on an ammunition crate, carefully inspecting every buckle, strap, and piece of equipment for what was already the third time. His movements were slow and deliberate, more an effort to calm his nerves than to find any fault in his gear. Around him, boots scraped across the concrete floor, rifles were adjusted, and whispered conversations filled the air. But Blythe barely seemed to notice any of it. Private Robert Popeye Wynn wandered past with his usual easy grin, a half-smoked cigarette tucked behind one ear. Even on the eve of one of history's largest military operations, he somehow managed to keep his sense of humor. "You ready for this, Philly?" he asked with a nod toward Blythe. Blythe managed only a faint smile without answering. Popeye chuckled to himself before replying, "Well, one way or another, we're all going to get our feet wet." Moments later, the steady rumble of aircraft engines echoed across the airfield. Orders were given, equipment was gathered, and the waiting was finally over. Albert Blythe's journey to this moment had begun 2 years earlier. In 1942, he enlisted in the United States Army, eager to leave behind the limitations of life in Philadelphia. Like many young Americans, the war represented danger beyond imagination, but it also offered an opportunity to build a new life and become someone different from the man he had been. That transformation began at Camp Toccoa, Georgia, where Easy Company was formed under the demanding command of Captain Herbert Sobel. The training was relentless. Long runs up Currahee Mountain, endless drills, inspections, and strict discipline pushed every recruit to their physical and mental limits. For Blythe, who was naturally quiet and reserved, the hardship revealed something unexpected. Within the rigid structure of airborne training, he discovered purpose and belonging. Every jump from the aircraft required absolute trust in his equipment and in the men around him. Every exercise reinforced discipline and teamwork. The demanding routine suited someone searching for direction, and gradually he became part of a company whose members would rely upon one another more than anyone else. When Easy Company deployed to England in preparation for the invasion of Europe, Blythe devoted himself completely to his duties. He admired leaders such as Richard Winters and Carwood Lipton, men whose calm confidence seemed unshakable. Their presence reassured him, and he drew strength simply from serving alongside them. The night of June 5th finally arrived, and Easy Company boarded their transport aircraft bound for Normandy. Like countless other paratroopers, Blythe's jump did not go according to plan. Scattered by anti-aircraft fire, poor visibility, and the confusion of darkness, he landed well away from his designated drop zone. The Norman countryside was unfamiliar, its fields covered in mist beneath the pale glow of the moon. Isolated from his company, uncertain of his location, and hearing distant gunfire in every direction, Blythe found himself completely alone. Fear overtook him. Seeking cover, he slid into a roadside ditch and clutched his rifle tightly against his chest. Every sound seemed magnified in the darkness. Unsure where friend or enemy might be, he remained hidden. Eventually, sheer physical exhaustion overcame his fear. Despite everything happening around him, Blythe fell asleep, not because he felt safe, but because the strain of training, the flight across the English Channel, and the emotional weight of the invasion had left him with nothing more to give. Robert Popeye Wynn approached military life from an entirely different perspective. Known throughout Easy Company as one of its greatest practical jokers, Popeye possessed an easygoing personality that often helped lighten even the darkest situations. Long before joining the Airborne, he and Darrell Shifty Powers had become close friends. During training, they made a simple wager. Whoever quit first would owe the other $10. Neither man ever collected, because neither was willing to quit. At Camp McCall, Popeye briefly served as Captain Sobel's runner. During one nighttime training exercise, he became disoriented and lost in the darkness. When Sobel demanded an explanation, Popeye answered with complete honesty, "I couldn't see in the dark." Sobel, never known for his patience, immediately replaced him. Incidents like that became part of Popeye's reputation. Trouble, whether intentional or accidental, seemed to follow him everywhere. At Fort Bragg, someone handed him an unusually long bayonet and informed him that he was being transferred. For a short time he believed the story completely before discovering the entire thing had been an elaborate prank played on him. The joke became so well known within the company that fellow paratroopers Paul Rogers and Walter Gordon even composed a humorous poem about it. During the voyage to England aboard the troop ship, Popeye developed another habit. Unable to tolerate the ship's food, he survived largely on candy bars while passing the time with poker and dice games alongside the other men. Amid the boredom of the crossing, absurd moments stood out more clearly than anything else. One of the stories he never forgot involved Mike Ranney, who was struck by a seagull while the ship was near Liverpool. It was ridiculous, almost unbelievable, but moments like that provided laughter at a time when everyone understood what awaited them across the channel. For Popeye, it was often the absurdity of military life that made the fear bearable. Back in Normandy, Blythe eventually awoke to the sound of hushed voices nearby. Other lost American paratroopers had gathered in the darkness, each trying to determine where they were and how to reach their objectives. Relieved not to be alone any longer, Blythe joined the small group as they cautiously made their way towards Sainte-Mère-Église and eventually to the area around Saint-Marcouf, where scattered elements of Easy Company had begun to regroup after the chaotic airborne drop. That morning, a now famous photograph captured several smiling paratroopers posing with a captured German flag. Despite everything they had endured during the night, many of the men wore broad smiles for the camera. Blythe stood near the edge of the group, noticeably quieter than many of his comrades, uncertain but finally reunited with familiar faces. The fighting around Carentan soon tested every man in Easy Company, and for Albert Blythe, the strain became almost unbearable. During the fierce engagements depicted in Band of Brothers as Carentan, the relentless combat and emotional exhaustion finally caught up with him. Overwhelmed by fear and fatigue, Blythe suffered what would now likely be recognized as an acute combat stress reaction. His vision faded until everything before him turned black, leaving him unable to function. He was taken to an aid station, where he sat quietly, withdrawn from everything happening around him. Lieutenant Richard Winters, himself nursing a wound to his leg, noticed Blythe's condition and walked over to him. Kneeling beside the shaken paratrooper, Winters spoke calmly and reassuringly. "You're okay, Blythe. You're going to be okay." The words were simple, but they had an effect. Gradually, Blythe's vision began to return, and with it came his confidence. It was one of many moments during the campaign that demonstrated not only Winters' leadership, but also his understanding of the psychological toll combat could inflict. While Blythe struggled with fear, Robert Popeye Wynn faced danger in a different way. During the fighting on D-Day, Popeye was seriously wounded. As fellow soldiers passed by his position, each assumed he had not yet received medical attention and administered a dose of morphine before moving on. Unaware that others had already done the same, several men repeated the process, leaving Popeye heavily medicated. Eventually, William Wild Bill Garnier, together with Carwood Lipton and other members of the company, managed to drag Popeye away from the exposed gun position where he had fallen. They loaded him onto a local farmer's cart and transported him toward the beach, alongside many other wounded Americans. Even there, safety remained elusive. German aircraft periodically strafed the crowded evacuation areas, forcing the wounded and medical personnel to remain constantly alert despite their injuries. Amid the confusion, Popeye encountered a Navy sailor from Norfolk, whom he vaguely recognized from before the war. The sailor managed to bring him something to eat. After days of combat and poor rations, Popeye later remembered it as one of the best meals he had eaten in weeks. He was eventually evacuated across the English Channel, receiving stitches during the journey before arriving at a hospital in Wales. There, while recovering, he learned that Army regulations required soldiers who had been absent from their units for more than 90 days to be reassigned elsewhere. The thought of leaving Easy Company behind was unacceptable. Determined to return, Popeye persuaded a sympathetic sergeant to help him. Doctors eventually approved paperwork assigning him only to light duty while he continued to recover. Before anyone could process the forms, Popeye simply tore them apart, Refusing to accept reassignment, he returned to Easy Company on September 1, 1944, arriving just in time to participate in Operation Market Garden and the airborne assault into the Netherlands. Albert Blythe also returned to active service after recovering from his breakdown. Determined to prove both to himself and to those around him that he could continue fighting, he volunteered for dangerous assignments whenever the opportunity arose. One such mission took place during a patrol on the outskirts of Carentan. As Easy Company advanced cautiously through the countryside, they approached an isolated farmhouse suspected of concealing enemy troops. Lieutenant Harry Welsh and Sergeant Carson called for volunteers to move forward and investigate. Without hesitation, Blythe stepped out of the line. As the patrol advanced toward the building, a German sniper suddenly opened fire. A single shot rang across the field. Blythe collapsed instantly, struck in the shoulder. For many years, countless viewers believed that wound had claimed his life. The closing text of Band of Brothers stated that Albert Blythe died in 1948 from injuries sustained in Normandy. Although repeated by many, including historian Stephen Ambrose, that account was incorrect. Blythe survived. Meanwhile, Popeye prepared for another combat jump, this time over Holland. Still recovering from his wounds, he found sitting almost impossible because of lingering pain. Instead, he remained standing throughout much of the flight, less by preference than by necessity. After landing in the Netherlands, misfortune struck almost immediately. Somewhere during the jump or landing, Popeye lost his wallet. Along with it disappeared months of accumulated back pay, an aggravating loss in the middle of an already demanding campaign. Despite setbacks, he remained with Easy Company as the war continued into the bitter winter of 1944. During the Battle of the Bulge, Popeye witnessed many close friends become casualties. Among them was Walter Gordon, who was gravely wounded during the fighting. Medical personnel attempted to administer a blood transfusion, but Gordon understood the severity of his injuries. According to Popeye's recollection, Gordon offered only a few quiet words. "I'm going home." Those words stayed with him for the rest of his life. Albert Blythe spent well over a year recovering from the wound he received in Normandy. Unlike the story presented in the television series, he eventually returned to civilian life, finding employment with Westinghouse after the war. Later, during the Korean War, he was recalled to military service, although available records indicate he did not see combat during that conflict. Albert Blythe died in Germany on December 17, 1967, from complications caused by a perforated ulcer. Remarkably, only a week before his death, he had attended a remembrance ceremony in Bastogne alongside fellow veterans. Even decades after the fighting had ended, the experiences of Easy Company remained an inseparable part of his life. Popeye Wynn adjusted to post-war life with the same humor that had carried him through the war itself. During the 1980s, he exchanged letters with Richard Winters, recalling countless memories from their years together in Easy Company. He wrote about practical jokes, the ferret kept in one of the huts, a stolen turkey leg, endless pranks between friends, and the laughter that somehow existed alongside constant danger and heartbreaking loss. He never attempted to romanticize combat. Instead, he remembered it honestly, acknowledging both its absurd moments and its terrible cost.